Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. And we're back. Welcome to episode 73 entitled Making Homework Meaningful. I don't really think I need to preface this topic really. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We're just going to kind of, look at a little bit of homework. I have discussed homework on this podcast before. Way back in the day. I don't even remember now what episode that was, but I know it was one of the earlier ones, and it was actually more or less just kind of getting a parent opinion of homework. I had a discussion with a parent who is also my sister. So that I will try to find it and link it. And of course, this is all if I happen to remember to do that. And yeah, I don't know if I've discussed it any other time, but if I see any other episodes in which I discuss that, then I will try to link that as well. But so we're just going to go straight into making it meaningful. So I'd really like to kind of begin by asking the question, what really does research tell us about homework? I mean, I feel like homework is one of those topics that's just very highly debated. I don't know that anyone can really truly agrees on what kind of homework, how much homework. I mean, I think there's some agreement within those discussions, but it's such one of those questions that I just feel like there's maybe still more questions than answers, and certainly many different opinions, also depending on the group of persons who you're asking, teachers, among the different grade levels, even parents, students. So finding some kind of consistency and responses is probably going to be a little bit difficult. Anyway, so I'm going to kind of look at something on Reading Rockets that's discussing what exactly the results say on the research behind homework. And basically it says that it's vague. So this is on readingrockets.org. I will have this linked into the show notes, but it's key lessons, what research says about the value of homework, and it's by the Center for Public Education. And do I have a date on this? I don't see a date. I'm not seeing a date on this article. Let me go back into the search and see if it maybe said it in the search. Nope. So no date, but I can say that I'll have this linked and you can take a look. And there's lots of different articles. I definitely encourage, like with any topic that's discussed, not just on this show, but any show, and probably being that my audience is primarily made of educators. I think you're probably well aware of this, but you would definitely never rely on just one source. Always question the source. Go out and collect as much information as possible. Don't just take what one person says. Again, I get that my audience here are primarily educators, so I think you know that, but I do want to put that out there that I realize this is one source. Okay, so basically It opens up with whether homework helps students and how much homework is appropriate has been debated for many years, as I think we know that. We've seen online discussions about it, probably heard back and forth via interviews. It's been out in the news. I remember when there was really a couple of years where it seemed that I was always hearing, sorry, this is me talking obviously right now, but I remember just really homework was making headlines all the time. You just heard it all the time, turned on the news, and it was being debated. Parents who were refusing to have their children do homework. And I'm not saying that is necessarily bad, because I am definitely a parent who, with a parent of a child who has struggled with homework, I get those points of views very easily, because I feel like that's also been my struggle, where I see there definitely needs to be a balance with homework at any grade, and that my personal opinion is there has to be some kind of difference in homework when you're looking at the younger grades versus the older grades. So yeah, but I do remember there was a time period where it seemed like this was a topic that was frequently brought up. It was everywhere. But anyway, yeah, so going back to the article, let's see, kind of at the end of this paragraph, unfortunately, the research has produced mixed results so far, and more research is needed. Nonetheless, there are some findings that can help to inform decisions about homework. What follows is a summary of the research to date. Before I go further into this article and what it tells us about research, I always kind of like to remind myself and maybe others that, according to Hattie's meta-analysis, we can see that we educators, there's almost nothing that we do that is going to really hurt students academically. So knowing that tells me that probably some degree of homework is going to be healthy and beneficial. I think the real question there is, what is that degree then, right? Because I definitely know in the past I've looked at research that says, there really is a point where it begins to have a negative effect on students. So, keeping it in moderation. But again, what is moderation? And does that depend on the student? Does that depend on the type of class, the type of content, the type of work? Is it content specific? Is it skill specific? I'm throwing these questions out because those are the questions that I think really need to be examined. I think when we throw a term out like homework, there's so many different factors involved. What is it? We have to define it. And maybe it isn't necessarily the same thing based on if we're aiming at content, if we're aiming at skill, if we're aiming at strategy. So just all of those components, I think, really have to be examined. So if you can't already tell, my personal opinion is still one that's kind of convoluted. I can say that I think in the traditional sense of homework, I do think there are definitely antiquated ways that we have done it that I don't necessarily think we should still be doing it the same way. But I don't think that this is an easy answer and that one size fits all. I don't believe that at all. But let's continue on. So looking at this article, the link between homework and student achievement is far from clear. So unfortunately, we're seeking clarity and it's just not there. So it goes on to say there's no conclusive evidence that homework increases student achievement across the board. Some studies show positive effects of homework under certain conditions. I wonder what those conditions are. And for certain students, I wonder who those students are. And some show no effects, and I wonder why. Like, what did that homework that produced no effects, what did it look like? And who did that homework? And some suggest even negative effects. So, yeah, it's just so inconclusive, but I think we would have to look at those specific studies to really better understand what the conditions were, what were their age, under what condition were they doing the homework. Was it after a long day of school and then they had sports and they had this and that and they were absolutely exhausted? Was it homework conducted on the weekend when presumably they would have a lighter workload during the day? I mean, what exactly were those conditions? I think we need to have all of those questions answered, and that could maybe better help us to understand this the issue of homework. Okay, so moving on. Homework appears to have more positive effects for certain groups of students. Okay, definitely that's one of the questions we're having here. Okay, so older students benefit more from homework than younger students. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty consistent with a lot of the research that I have read and heard on homework. So some studies have shown that older students gain more academic benefits from homework than do younger students. Perhaps younger students have less effective study habits are more easily distracted. So I guess that's maybe one theory that's going into that. And that's, makes sense. But I would also kind of throw out that a lot of times with the younger students, at least when you are dealing with a parent population that is more readily accessible to their students. Maybe they're not having to have one parent who's available, but those who are more hands-on, I know they're much more involved and they're going to help assist in many cases. Or maybe I shouldn't say many, but I'm looking also at the student population that I work with currently and have for the last 10 years. But these are more affluent families and they certainly have a lot of resources and means, and time is definitely one of the resources they have. Typically, these are families where, not in every case, but most of them have just one parent who's working. So the other parent is more readily available and will sit down with their child and really help organize the time and their materials. So I think that can make a difference as well. But yeah, I do think even though they're younger, in many cases, if they have that advantage of having a parent who helps them with study habits, that's definitely something that's going to help them in the younger. So even though they're young, doesn't necessarily mean that all of those things are impossible, because if they have an adult helping, then there you go. Okay, continuing on. Students from low-income homes may not benefit as much from homework as those from higher income homes. Okay, I think this kind of goes, I didn't preview this article, maybe I should have, because I'm realizing that some of the points that I'm expressing are coming up here naturally, but absolutely. So let's see what it says. Some researchers believe that students from higher income homes have more resources, such as computers, and receive more assistance with homework, while low income students may have fewer resources and less assistance, and therefore less likely to complete the homework and re-up any related benefits. Yeah, so that really ties in perfectly with what I was just commenting. I have noticed this from someone who, I went to school in a public school system. And, we were not super well off, but I come from a middle class family. So certainly we had some resources. But just kind of looking at that environment and comparing it to the families with whom I have been working with for years now. These families have, they actually create a lot of times they live in homes in which they can have a room that's a separate study space for their young child. And usually these are fantastic spaces that, many times I have not seen this before. I'm actually very often in awe of the study and working spaces that they create for their children. And again, it's because they have that advantage. That's not to make anyone feel bad who is like, hey, I don't have a separate space. I can't do that for my child. I live in that reality too. We do have an extra little office, but it's in the back of the room. And I definitely have thought of using it as a space for us or space for my daughter. But the reality of the way this house is, the further back you get in the house, the less reliable the internet is. So it kind of proved that, hey, in theory, it was a great space, but in actuality, it didn't. It's become more of, I don't want to say storage, but I'll say storage because it is kind of, we have like our Christmas ornaments and decorations. Things are basically the decorations that are more seasonal tend to get stored in that room, just because of the reality of, when we're studying and doing things, we rely so heavily on the internet. So, but these families, going back to what I was really saying, is they create this space. So they have desks, they have learning materials, they have resources. It's a nice, quiet, very calm environment. And I think that is definitely to the benefit of the students, but that's not, looking at your financial resources, that's going to play a huge part. Not everyone can do that. So of course, if a parent can do that, that's gonna be at the benefit of the students, but that's not every student's reality, because that's just life. Okay, let's continue on. Students with learning disabilities benefit from homework under certain conditions. Yeah, definitely. So it says students with learning disabilities can benefit from homework if appropriate supervision and monitoring are provided. I feel like that's probably does not need too much elaboration. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. If there's something there that's making it difficult, those conditions need to be right for the student. All right, let's see. So Asian American students may benefit more from homework than do students from other ethnic groups. That's interesting. A national study of the influence of homework on student grades across 5 ethnic groups found that homework had a stronger impact on Asian American students than on students of other ethnicities. That is interesting. I would love to learn more about that. I feel like I don't really know much about that. That's interesting. It's an interesting point. So then looking at even ethnic groups, that plays a big piece of it. And I can see where that is something that's going to be really important, especially when we're looking at education in the United States, where it really is more of a melting pot. You look at someone like myself, who is an international teacher, and though we do have groups of foreign students, and there's some diversity, it's really much less diverse. Most of my students are Mexican. But, well, I mean, that has somewhat changed because this year I have some foreign students. When I say foreign, like really, they maybe have just been here in Mexico, maybe just beginning of like the last year, or came at some point last year, or just came this year. So it's interesting. And yeah, I'm interested. Of course, I know in this article it says Asian American, but yeah, just thinking about the different ethnic groups, that's going to be a component of this. Okay, let's see. Homework may have non-academic benefits. Okay. Certain non-academic benefits of homework have been shown, especially for younger students. Indeed, some primary level teachers may assign homework for such benefits, which include learning the importance of responsibility, managing time, developing study habits, and staying with the task until it is completed. So yeah, I think that's pretty well known. I think the argument around that, though, that I've definitely heard is, can those habits be established in some other way? And I would argue absolutely yes. It definitely can. But I think it's, I don't think that's all bad to use homework as a way of developing those habits. And I think those are good habits for students to have. And I really get both arguments because maybe some parents are already really good at developing or working on developing those habits with their children. But what do you do in cases where parents are not working on those habits? And then another argument maybe, well, is it the teacher's responsibility to develop those habits at home? I don't know. I think it's, maybe not, maybe it's not, but we should be working on those habits inside the classroom for sure. But I think, the whole saying of it takes a village. So I don't know if my opinion is changing from what it previously was, because I think because of some of my negative feelings of homework, I've definitely been in the past more like, hey, I don't really think that it's too much of the teacher's business if that's happening at home or not. And I think I still agree with that. But I don't know, the deeper I continue into this field of teaching, I think that there's definitely traits and habits and behaviors that we're trying to establish that our greater purpose is for it to stem beyond the classroom, stem beyond the school, really. And how do you do that? Well, sure, it probably starts in the classroom, and maybe we can't really be in control of where else it's taking place, but maybe we have a part. Maybe it's a small part, but I think maybe we do have a part. Okay, too much homework may diminish its effectiveness. While research on the optimum amount of time students should spend on homework is limited, there are indications that for high school students, an hour and a half to 2.5 hours per night is optimum. I think that sounds good, and I think that sounds fair. I mean, I definitely know as my daughter has gotten older and she's in high school, for my age, I have what would be probably an older daughter. My husband and I had her in our early 20s. So, she's actually getting closer and closer to graduating from high school. But to me, I think that sounds like a fair amount of time. In the past, when she was younger, she was doing what I felt was just too much homework, excessive amount, at least in terms of how long it would take her to complete the homework. And I did not feel that that was healthy. I do know that at her school, they have really been a little more conscious in regards to the amount of time that students are spending on homework. And I think this has been very helpful. Okay, so when students spend more time than this on homework, the positive relationship with student achievement diminishes. So I think that's true. So once it's been too much, student achievement diminishes. And I also can just say the child is going to develop a negative relationship with homework. There's a lot of negatives there. So I really do think there's got to be a balance on the time factor. And I'd also say when you're looking at the higher levels, teachers really need to know what other teachers are sending out. There needs to be, like if everyone is sending out projects at the same time, that's a lot on the child, on the student. So teachers really need to be aware of the load that students are carrying. And I'm not saying that I know exactly how to do that or that I know the answers, although perhaps teachers having a shared calendar of their homework and projects, that's just one solution, throwing that out there. But I think there are ways to work around it, but really kind of knowing that we need to be in the know is step one. And then step two might be how do we get in the know? How do we share that schedule of homework? The amount of homework completed by students seems to be more positively associated with student achievement than of homework assigned by teachers. So the amount of homework is more positively associated than the amount of homework completed. That was the key word. For a second I asked, what? The amount of homework completed by students. I'm saying that again. The amount of homework completed, more positively associated than the amount of homework assigned. So some research has shown that students who spend more time on homework score higher on measures of achievement and attitude. Oh, there we go. There's that positive relationship, and which I think attitude probably stems from that. Studies that have delved more deeply into this topic suggest, however, that the amount of homework assigned by teachers is unrelated to student achievement, while the amount of homework actually completed by students is associated with higher achievement. But that makes sense, and I would also argue because maybe students are only completing a fraction of what's being assigned. So I can see why that correlation is going to differ. I wonder what that would look like if the amount completed was also the same as the amount assigned, or if they're looking at both in cases where will the student still achieve academically? Will there be academic gains if they're completing all of the homework that's assigned? I don't know, maybe that's what was looked at, but it doesn't really say, so I don't know for sure. Okay, after school programs that provide homework assistance may improve student behavior, motivation, and work habits, but not necessarily academic achievement. Well, I think the wording right there just is so ambiguous. After school programs that provide homework assistance may improve the behavior, motivation, work habits, but not necessarily. So by using the word not necessarily, the implication is but sometimes it may affect academic achievement. Okay, studies of after-school programs that provide homework assistance have found few links, so maybe they found few links to improve student achievement. Several studies, however, noted improvements in student motivation and work habits, which may indirectly affect achievement. Well, I would say those are factors of achievement, motivation. The more motivated you are, I think, you're going to be more likely to make academic achievements than if you were not motivated. Motivation is a huge factor of learning. And then work habits too. So I think overall that looks like it's going to be positive. I wonder if they just maybe also need more research and studies done in this area to prove that indefinitely, because it does use the wording, it found few definite links, but how many studies have been conducted on that? I would say that's definitely an area that can be looked at more. Okay, the effect of parent involvement in homework is unclear. Studies of parent involvement in homework have produced mixed results. Homework assignments that require interaction between students and parents result in higher levels of parent involvement and more likely to be turned in than non-interactive assignments. Some studies have shown, however, that parent involvement in homework has no impact on student achievement. Other studies indicate that students whose parents are more involved in their homework have lower test scores and class grades, but this may be because the students were already lower performing and needed more help from their parents than did higher performing students. Yeah, that makes sense. So like if a student who's already doing well academically maybe doesn't really need parent involvement, they're already doing well, so they're going to perform well. Or maybe a student who was struggling needed the additional support, received the additional support, and then that was kind of able to lift them up a bit. So yeah, I can see that's vague. But then I think you do see the benefit then of the parent being involved, especially when it's their child is struggling. Then maybe that's like, hey, I need to get involved. There's little research on connections between specific kinds of homework and student achievement. Okay, that was one of my opening questions. Like, how are we defining the homework? What is the homework? What are the homework activities? What is the objective? What are the goals? Is it content specific? Is it skill specific? Is it strategy specific? There's so many factors involved. You cannot just throw out the term homework and expect that it's well understood. Okay, so most teachers assign homework to reinforce what was presented in class or to prepare students for new material. Less commonly, homework is assigned to extend student learning to different contexts or to integrate learning by applying multiple skills around a project. Little research exists on the effects of these different kinds of homework on student achievement, leaving policymakers with little evidence on which to base decisions. Yeah, so basically that just sums it up to we really need more research and more studies done on the kinds of homework and their impact, and really looking at kinds of homework. But then they have to look at all the other factors. When is the homework being done? Under what conditions? Is it in a loud environment? Is it in a quiet study place? What ethnic group does the student who's doing the homework belong to? What is the socioeconomic status of the family? You can see how this becomes it's multi faceted, multi-layered. There's just so much that goes into it. You just think homework and that should be easy to figure out, but it's not. And I think it's all of those layers that exist to it that's really adding to the complexity. Maybe not even adding to the complexity, but is the what's making up that complexity. Yeah, you guys, I think I'm going to end this right here. This was not intentioned to be a 2-part series or a 2-part show, but I thought I would just open up with looking at what the research says on homework, and maybe that was well planned or not very well planned on my part, because I did not realize that I would be diving so deeply into it. So I think as we continue to look at making homework meaningful, I'm going to do a second part where I'm going to go a little bit into how you can do that. So today's episode primarily was just ended up diving in more about what does the research say about homework. So that's going to be a wrap for that, you guys. So basically all of that to say is it is unclear. There are there's more that needs to be done, but I think it's good for us to know what is unclear, because that's where we really need to further research. But I think a lot of those things we know also too by if we can examine our own students and figure out some of their study habits, and as long as we know a bit about their background, and hopefully we do, maybe that can be beneficial, even if it's just active research in our classrooms and trying to find those links. I think we can play a part in that. Okay, you guys, so that is it. Now going into our wins and fails for the week. A win for the week. Well, I will have to say that I have a lot of squirrely kids, which I've talked about before. And they have difficulty like any kid at this age. My students are about age 6, more or less. But just body control, self-control, it's difficult, but I just feel like especially with this group, it's been maybe even more especially difficult and challenging, and something that we are continuously working on. And I'm actually going to do, I have in the plans an upcoming episode to discuss ways to work with this. It is ongoing. There's not just one thing I think you can do. But anyway, I did a special activity this week where we were really practicing controlling our bodies and not touching others. And I just feel like that it has to be an intentional effort on our part to constantly be working on this, because of the lack of self-control. I mean, like students just hugging kids spontaneously, which is nice, right? That's a nice touch, but sometimes somebody doesn't want to be hugged, or just reaching out and touching someone, and things like that. And the reason why it's becoming a problem is also, in the meantime, some of this touching is touching other students' materials, studying other students' creations, especially in our math station when we're working on recreating landmarks right now, currently the Eiffel Tower. And my poor kids, like just the other day, we're so upset but because of this. But yeah, so I did an activity and actually had to open up the day doing this activity because I was getting so many student complaints about things that had happened the previous day. And anyway, it was just such a great activity. I'm not going to explain the details because I really want to do an upcoming podcast, here in the future on what I'm doing. But it was really good. And then we could refer back to it later in the day. And I really saw a difference that my kids, at least for that day, and I will have to revisit and remind them, but they were much better and they were being much more mindful of where's my body, who is it touching, who is it not touching, or hopefully it's not touching. So that was a win. Fail is very much related. This kind of stemmed from, on this past Tuesday, the day means nothing, but just so you know, the other day, it's all day this is an issue, but especially during math stations where there's so much movement and there's creations and there's this and there's that. So basically what happened is, students were, I had one student in particular who was having a very difficult time, and with a couple of students, I think he kind of destroyed one of their Eiffel Towers, and I just had really upset kids. And the worst part about this, of course, is, it's happening during a formal observation that's going on. I'm being observed, and I'm okay with that because, I feel like my colleagues who I work with are so lovely and understanding, and they really get that things are not going to always go perfectly. I think, whenever you're being observed, they might be looking more for how do you manage it? How do you handle it? But the other thing was that it was the end of the day and I was so tired, and I don't know, it was just very difficult trying to, I just feel like the earlier in the day when I'm having to manage those things are easier. By the end of the day, I'm not just like tired, but it's an exhaustion because I've been managing those kinds of behaviors all day long, and I'm super taxed by the end of the day. I'm super taxed. So, that was my fail for the week. You win some, you lose some, but you live for another day. Okay, well, that's it, you guys. That is a wrap. I thank you so much for joining me today. If you would like to add to what I think is a wonderful conversation, I'd love to really grapple with this idea of homework and what it is and what it means and what are the implications. I would love to hear from you. I love when you tweet to me. Having said that, I don't think I've ever had a listener tweet to me, so this is all hypothetical, but I would love for you to tweet to me. I can be found on Twitter at TammyJ123. That's at TAMIJ123. Don't forget, next week we will have part 2 to making homework meaningful. Until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.